Chapter 20, Part 2. I'm going to try. Quote, yeah, a book. You'll be needing a good artist to do the cover. Someone who can do it with heart, in line with the meaning of the book, with the goal. And where are you going to find an artist if you haven't got any money? Quote, I'll have to do without an artist, without a fancy cover. Quote, you should do it up brown with a cover that really fits in with the book. If I had good paper, brushes, and paints, I'd help you. Only these things cost a lot nowadays. Quote, you mean to say you're an artist? Quote, I'm an officer, but I've loved drawing and painting since childhood. I joined various art groups. Whenever I could steal some time, I'd paint pictures and give them to friends. Quote, well, why did you go and become an officer if you still wanted to paint all these years? Quote, my great-grandfather was an officer, my grandfather and my father too. I loved and respected my father. I knew, I felt what he wanted me to be. So I tried to be that, and I made it all the way to colonel. Quote, where did you serve? Mainly in the KGB. That's where I resigned from. Quote, through attrition or you were forced out? Quote, it was my decision. I just couldn't take it anymore. What couldn't you take? Well, you know the popular song, Oh, officers, officers, your heart is under fire. Quote, they tried to kill you? They made an attempt on your life? Did they shoot at you, maybe to settle some kind of score? Quote, officers often get shot at. It's an age-old story, officers meeting up with bullets, going to the defense of those behind them, going along not suspecting their own hearts were under fire, not suspecting the fatal shot to come from behind, an accurate shot, an exploding bullet, and straight to the heart. Quote, how so? Quote, you remember the pre-perestroika times? The celebrations, the 1st of May, the 7th of November, huge columns of people crying, hooray, glory to, long live. Me and the other officers, not just from the KGB, were proud of the fact that we were defenders of our people. We were protecting them. For most officers, this was their whole reason for living. Then came perestroika and glasnost. Other shouts began to be heard. And it turned out that we, the KGB officers, were bastards and executioners. We were defending the wrong people and the wrong things. The ones that earlier marched in Soviet columns under red banners had gone over to march in other columns under different banners, and we got left to take the blame. I had a wife, 9 years younger than me, a real beauty. I loved her. And I still do. She was so proud of me. We had a son who was an only child. He came along rather late, how shall I say it? Now he's 17. In the beginning, he too was proud of me. He respected me. Then, after this whole business started, my wife became very quiet. She wouldn't look at me in the eye. She began to be ashamed of me. I handed in my resignation and took a job as a security guard at a commercial bank. I hid my KGB uniform where no one would find it. But there were unasked questions still hanging in the air over my wife and son. You can't answer questions which haven't been asked. They saw the answers in the papers and on TV screens. Turned out we officers were involved in nothing but our dachas and, of course, oppression. But, I interjected, they showed on TV some pretty fancy dachas, which are homes, of the military elite, and they showed the real thing, not just faked pictures. Yeah, they showed the real thing, not just faked pictures. Only those dachas were sleazy chicken houses compared to what many of those who accused their owners have themselves today. Look at you. You had a whole ship at your disposal. That's a lot bigger than a general's dacha. And don't forget, that general was once a cadet. He dug trenches. Then he became a lieutenant, got shifted from barracks to barracks. And naturally, he wanted to have a house and a dacha for his family, just like everyone else. And who knows how many times he had to jump out of his warm bed in the middle of the night in that same dacha to go out on an emergency mission. Quote, officers used to be respected in Russia. They were rewarded with an estate. Now it's been decided that a simple dacha with 1,500 square meters of land is too much for a general. Quote, everybody lived differently before, I observed. Quote, differently? Yes, differently. Yes, everybody. But you can't tell me it wasn't the officers who were singled out for blame ahead of everyone else. Quote, it was the officers who demonstrated on the Senate Square. They were thinking of the people. These officers were later sent either to the scaffold or to the mines in Siberia. Nobody stood up to defend them. Later, Russian officers fought for the Tsar and for the fatherland in the trenches against the Germans, and back home, revolutionary patriots were already getting bullets ready for their hearts, more terrible than the lead ones. White guards, monsters, that's what they called the officers returning from the war. We're talking about World War I. Officers who were simply trying to maintain order. There was chaos all around. Everything was falling apart. All our former values, both material and spiritual, were being either torched or trampled upon. It was so hard for them, those white guard officers. They put on clean underwear under their uniforms and went on a psychological attack. You know what's meant by psychological attack? Quote, it's when you try to scare the hell out of your opponent. I've seen it in films. In Chapayev, for example, which is a classic Russian film from 1934, the white guard officers are advancing in formation and they get strafed by machine gun fire. Some fall, but the others close ranks and keep advancing. Yep, that's it. They fall and still keep advancing. But the thing is, they weren't really attacking to begin with. Quote, how so? What was the point of advancing then? Quote, in military practice, the whole reason for the goal of any attack is either the capture or the physical annihilation of the enemy, preferably with the least possible loss in the ranks of the attackers. To keep advancing against strafing from machine guns concealed in trenches, that was only done when there was another goal set, either consciously or subconsciously. Quote, what goal? Quote, maybe, and this goes against the logic of the art of war, it was to demonstrate something to the enemy even at the cost of one's own life, to make the soldiers firing the guns and killing the advancing marchers stop and think, to realize something and not fire at others. Quote, so in that case, their death would be something like Jesus Christ's death on the cross? Quote, something like that. We still manage to remember Christ somehow. The young cadets and generals who advanced against their attackers, we've forgotten them. Maybe even now their souls, dressed in clean underwear under their officers' uniforms, are standing in front of the bullets we're firing and pleading with us, calling on us to stop and think. The expression clean underwear under their uniforms, the footnote says, is a sign that the officers expected to be killed in the battle that day. Quote, why would they be calling us when they were being fired on? We weren't even born. Quote, no, we weren't. But bullets are still flying around today, new bullets. Who, if not us, is doing the firing? Quote, indeed, Bullets are still flying around today. And just why have they been flying around all these years? Why did you leave home?